Want scary stories? Listen.
In November of 1997, police forced their way into an old church in Kentucky. They were looking for a missing priest. But when they opened the confessional booth, they found a man sitting inside. The problem was that the man had been dead for 3 days. My name is Daniel, and this story happened in a small farming town in Kentucky. At the center of town stood St. Michael's Church, a small Catholic church surrounded by endless cornfields. Everyone knew the priest, Father Thomas. He was in his 60s, kind, quiet, the sort of man who never missed a service. He baptized children, married young couples, buried the dead, and for nearly 30 years, he had been the heart of the community, which is why people became concerned when he failed to appear for Sunday Mass. At first, nobody thought much of it. Maybe he was sick. Maybe he had gone to visit family. But by Sunday evening, nobody could reach him. His phone rang unanswered. His truck was still parked beside the church. And by Monday morning, someone called the police. Officers arrived shortly after 8. The church appeared completely normal. Every door was locked from the inside. Every window was secured. There were no signs of forced entry. Eventually, they entered through a side access door. The moment they stepped inside, something felt wrong. The building was silent. Not ordinary silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, as if the entire church was holding its breath. One of the officers would later describe it as the feeling you get moments before a thunderstorm. They searched the sanctuary, the offices, the storage rooms, the attic. Nothing. No sign of Father Thomas. Then one officer approached the confessional. The wooden door was closed. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. Finally, he pulled the door open and froze. Inside sat a man, motionless, head lowered, hands folded in his lap. The officer immediately recognized him. Michael Hunter, a local farmer. 3 days earlier, the entire town had attended his funeral after what doctors ruled was a fatal heart attack. The officer stumbled backward, shouting for the others. Within seconds, several officers rushed over, but when they looked inside the booth, it was empty, completely empty. No person, no movement, nothing. The officer insisted he had seen Michael. He swore it, every detail, the face, the clothing, even the wedding ring. But there was nobody there. The others assumed exhaustion, stress, a trick of the light. Yet, after that moment, strange things began appearing. Near the altar, officers discovered muddy footprints, bare footprints, as though someone had walked through wet earth and entered the church without shoes. The tracks led toward the rear wall and stopped at an old wooden cabinet. When the cabinet was moved aside, something unexpected appeared, a hidden door. Most of the church members had no idea it existed. The door was secured by a rusted iron lock. According to church records, it wasn't listed on any building plans. When officers broke the lock and opened the door, they discovered a stone staircase descending into darkness. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Their flashlights revealed ancient stone walls, faded Latin inscriptions. Most were impossible to read, but one phrase appeared repeatedly, again and again, on different walls, in different handwriting. He is still listening. The staircase seemed to descend far deeper than the church itself. With every step, the air grew colder. The temperature dropped so quickly that several officers later reported seeing their breath. The stone walls were damp, ancient, covered in faded markings and scratches. Some looked centuries old, Others seemed fresh, as though someone had carved them only days before. Again and again, the same phrase appeared. He is still listening. Eventually, the staircase opened into a chamber. The room was larger than anyone expected. At the center stood a single wooden chair, facing an old confessional booth, far older than the one upstairs. The wood was black with age. The structure looked centuries old. Its surface was covered in deep scratches, as if countless hands had clawed at it over the years. Scattered across the floor were dozens of cassette tapes. Many were labeled with names, others with dates. Some dated back decades. Dust covered nearly everything, except for one tape. It looked newer than the others. Written on the label was a date. The day before, Father Thomas disappeared. The officers carefully collected the tape and brought it upstairs. Back in the church office, they found an old cassette player and pressed play. At first, there was only breathing, slow, uneven breathing, the sound of someone trying to remain calm. Then a man spoke. His voice trembled. "Father, I think he comes at night." Several seconds passed. Then another voice answered, a priest's voice, calm, measured, but it wasn't Father Thomas. Investigators would later confirm that. The recording had been made less than 24 hours before the disappearance, yet the voice belonged to nobody currently living in the parish records. The man spoke again, his breathing becoming faster. "Who comes at night?" A long silence followed, so long that several officers thought the tape had stopped. Then the priest finally answered, "The ones we never released." The room went quiet. Several officers exchanged confused looks. Nobody understood what the phrase meant. Then something happened. A third voice appeared, a child's voice, soft, barely audible. At first, investigators assumed it was background interference, static, a defect in the recording. But audio specialists later isolated the sound, and what they heard sent chills through everyone involved in the case. The child whispered, "He's listening now." The tape ended. For weeks, experts attempted to explain the recording. They analyzed frequencies, background sounds, voice patterns. Nothing matched. No explanation was ever found. But the tape wasn't the worst thing hidden beneath the church. As investigators cataloged everything inside the chamber, one detective noticed an old wooden drawer built onto the base of the confessional. The drawer was locked. It took several minutes to force it open. Inside was a stack of confession records, hundreds of them, some dating back decades. Each page contained a name, a date, and a signature. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then one detective noticed something strange. Several names appeared more than once. Not uncommon in a small town, except for one detail. The second confession was always dated after the person's death. Michael Hunter, 3 months after his funeral. Sarah Wilkes, 6 years after a fatal car accident. Thomas Reed, 9 years after drowning in the river. The deeper they searched, the more names they found. Dozens of them. People who had supposedly returned to confession long after they had been buried. Near the bottom of the drawer sat a sealed envelope. No return address, no markings. Only 3 words written across the front. "Do not continue." Inside was a single handwritten page. The handwriting matched Father Thomas. The message read, "If you are reading this, I failed. Do not let anyone sit in the lower confessional. Do not open the door after midnight. And if you hear someone asking for confession, leave immediately." The letter was signed 3 days before Father Thomas disappeared. The discovery of the letter changed everything. The investigation expanded immediately. State police became involved. Church officials arrived from outside the county. Additional investigators searched the church grounds, the surrounding fields, nearby properties, every possible location where Father Thomas might have gone. Yet no trace of him was ever found. No body, no evidence of foul play, nothing. It was as if he had simply vanished. Then came the discovery that terrified everyone involved in the case. Archivists began reviewing decades of church records recovered from the hidden chamber. Most of the documents appeared ordinary. Baptisms, marriages, funeral services, routine church business. Then one archivist noticed something unusual, a funeral entry bearing the name Michael Hunter. At first, it seemed completely normal. Michael Hunter had died of a heart attack. Everyone in town knew that. Everyone had attended his funeral. But when the archivist checked the date, he froze. The funeral service had been conducted 2 days before Michael officially died. Investigators initially believed it was a clerical error, a simple mistake in the records. But the more they looked, the worse it became. Witnesses remembered attending the service. They remembered Michael's family. They remembered the coffin. Some even remembered Father Thomas delivering the sermon. Yet county records clearly showed that Michael Hunter remained alive for another 48 hours after the funeral had supposedly taken place. No explanation was ever found. As news of the discovery spread, rumors consumed the town. Some believed the hidden chamber had been used for secret rituals. Others believed Father Thomas had uncovered something buried beneath the church, something that should never have been disturbed. The official investigation remained open for months, but every lead eventually ended the same way. Nowhere, 1 week later, St. Michael's Church was ordered closed. Public access was prohibited. The building sat empty while officials debated what to do with it. Several months later, demolition was approved. Before the crews arrived, one officer returned alone to retrieve several documents that had been left behind. The church was dark, silent, abandoned. Dust covered the pews. The stained glass windows reflected faint moonlight across the floor. As he walked through the sanctuary, he heard something. A voice, soft, barely audible, coming from the confessional. The officer stopped, listening. At first he thought it was the wind. Then he heard the words clearly. "Father, forgive me." The voice sounded terrified, desperate, as though someone was pleading for help. The officer slowly approached the confessional, his hand shaking as he reached for the door. Then he pulled it open. The booth was empty, completely empty. No person, no movement, nothing. But something had changed. Fresh words had been carved into the wooden divider. The cuts looked recent, as if they had been made only moments before. The message read, "Father Thomas is still hearing. Confessions." The officer left the church immediately. He never returned. Several months later, St. Michael's Church was demolished. The hidden chamber was filled with concrete. The lower confessional was destroyed. The grounds were cleared. And eventually, nature reclaimed the land. Today, nothing remains of St. Michael's Church. No walls, no stained glass, no pews, no tower, just an empty field surrounded by corn. But locals still tell the same story. They say that on certain nights, usually just after midnight, a church bell can be heard, ringing across the fields, slow, distant, echoing through the darkness. The strange thing is, there hasn't been a bell tower there for nearly 30 years. But there is one final detail that most people never hear. According to county records, Father Thomas is still listed as missing. Not dead, not deceased, missing. And every year, someone claims to hear another sound mixed with a distant bell, a wooden door opening, followed by a quiet voice from somewhere in the darkness, waiting, listening, as if confession hours never ended.